بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم ربنا لك الحمد والشكر كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك منك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم اجعله خالصا لوجهك الكريم لا ابتغاء سمعة ولا شهرة ولا رياء. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. My dear brothers and sisters and youngsters, it is so lovely to see so many of you here tonight. It brings back the feeling of Ramadan, right? Which is around the corner, alhamdulillah. Ramadan is coming soon, but it's so nice to see so many people again in the masjid at night. Usually at Jum'ah it's full, but alhamdulillah. So jazakumullah khair, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you tremendously for making the effort to come and listen to the Seera, or the life of the best of all creations, Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So jazakumullah khair, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you the best of rewards in both this world, dunya, and in the next world, in the akhirah. And I'm very particularly pleased to see the beautiful young faces of the young brothers here, and I'm sure there are young sisters also in the section of the ladies. And why it's important especially to see the young people, because you are the future of this community and you are the future leaders, inshallah. And if Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam becomes your role model and you follow his footsteps, then you will absolutely succeed in this world and the next world. So what we want to do, inshallah ta'ala, every Friday after Maghrib is have this Mubarak, blessed gathering where we talk about the most blessed of all people, the most Mubarak of all people, and that is Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Rasulullah, the Messenger of Allah, the Nabi of Allah, alayhi afdal salawat and taslimat. May Allah's salutations and peace be upon him. And we will do this every Friday, inshallah ta'ala, after Maghrib. In Ramadan, we will decide how we're going to do it, but we will let you know then. So the first thing today, I want to give a quick introduction as to the first question that we always need to ask ourselves: why do we need to learn the Seera? Why the Seera is so important? And the Seera is an Arabic word, means the path or the life or the pattern. And so we want to learn the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the question is why? Well, the first answer is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will never be able to gain nearness. You cannot come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until you love Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam more than you love yourself, more than you love your mother and father, and more than you love anything and everybody on this earth. Number one. So it is, we study his Seera, or we listen to his Seera, because we want to love him and we want to follow him. And the only way you can love somebody if you understand who they are, right? If you know, they say usually you love somebody if you know their character, they have a beautiful character, or they have done some goodness to you, or they are excellent in their manners, or they are refined human beings, or they have done a favor to you. And Rasulullah is all of that. He is all of that. And later on we look at his beautiful physical appearance, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allah Ta'ala created him in the most beautiful of shapes, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He did us the greatest favor. You know, if somebody, now your parents do you huge favors, and Allah Ta'ala says you must love your parents, you must respect your parents. وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا. And don't say to your parents, uff, and don't raise your voice at your parents. Why? Because they've done you the greatest favor. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has done us the greatest of all favors, and that is he brought this deen to us. He brought the greatest ni'mah, the greatest bounty, And that is the bounty of Islam, the bounty of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so why should we not love him? Alayhi salatu wassalam. So one, we love him because he brought us this ni'mah, this bounty, this gift, the gift of Islam. And secondly, we love him sallallahu alayhi wa sallam because he had the most exalted and most sublime, the most beautiful akhlaq. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, when he describes his Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he describes him in the most beautiful of ways. And he says, you, O Muhammad, are on the highest pedestal of character. You have the highest akhlaq. You have the highest character. And we see that. You will see this in his seerah. How his character was with those who were close to him and those who were far away from him. How his beautiful akhlaq was with the Muslim and the non-Muslim, with the friend and the enemy, with the human and the animal, with his wife and his children and his neighbors, those who hurt him, how he was good with them, and those who used to strangle him when he was in sujood, how he never sought to revenge against them, how he always cried before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so people can get hidayah, alayhi salatu wasalam. So how can you not love him? So the first thing, the more we know about him, alayhi salatu wasalam, the more you will fall in love with him. And the more you fall in love with him, alayhi salatu wasalam, the more you want to follow his pattern, his sunnah, his lifestyle. And that is the second reason why we need to study the seerah. Secondly is to follow him because he is uswa hasana. He is the greatest role model. He is the greatest example. There can be no other example greater than him, alayhi salatu wassalam. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Allah Ta'ala says, in Rasulullah is the greatest example for you. It's the greatest role model. Nowadays, people want to follow role models. Psychologically speaking, everybody must follow somebody. You have to, when you're a child wants to imitate the parents, and then as they grow older, more mature, they start looking for a role model. And these role models can be actors or actresses or soccer players or football players or singers, and they bring them no benefit. No benefit. Right? Once in a school, Islamic school, I did a little experiment and I was asking the year 11 students, Muslim students, to write down on a piece of paper to list 3 of their top role models. Right? And I asked them, don't put your name on the paper, just fold it up and pass it down to me. And then we opened the little papers and read their role models. And many of them, alhamdulillah, maybe half said Rasulullah as their role model, but the majority were saying the actor, this is their role model, that actress is their role model, this player is their role model. And these role models are not role models for us. And all they want is your bucks, your money, that's all. They don't care about you. But Rasulullah cared about you. He cared about the ummah. He would sit one day, he was sitting one day and he was crying. So Allah Ta'ala sent Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam not to bring revelation, wahy, Quran. And Allah knows what's going on. But he comes to Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and he says, Inna Allah yas'aluk, Allah is asking you, O Muhammad, ma yubkik, O Muhammad. What makes you weep, O Muhammad? Why are you crying? Qala ummati ummati. I am weeping for my ummah, my followers. That's why I'm crying. I'm worried about them. Do you think the actor or actresses or that soccer player worries about us? he sits at night and cries, oh my God, I'm worried about my followers. He doesn't care. And so Allah Ta'ala says to Jibreel to tell Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Inna sanurdika fi ummatik, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah said to him, I will make you pleased regarding your ummah, regarding your followers. Don't worry. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Allah says to him in the Quran, Allah will give you and keep giving you, O Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, until you are pleased. And so he's our Muslim. He's our role model. We need to know how to follow him. And he showed us everything. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, nothing that brings you close to Jannah, but I told you about it. And nothing that takes you away from Jahannam, but I told you about it. All you have to do is follow. The way he ate, the way he drank, the way he slept, the way he walked, the way he spoke, the way he prayed salah, the way he fasted. So he's our uswa. He's our role model. And you won't follow him until you know him, alayhi salatu, know about his life. Thirdly, we follow him and we need to learn about him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, because we are the last ummah, we are the last nation. And we have been given the responsibility of da'wah ila Allah, to invite people ila Allah, to invite people to worship Allah. And the scholars, they say, مَنْ عَرِفَ السِّيرَةَ أَصْبَحَتْ عَلَيْهِ الدَّعْوَةُ يَسِيرًا. If you know the life of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it becomes easier for you to invite people to Allah. When you know how he did it, you want to do the same. But also, if you're a father, you need to know about the seerah of the Prophet, so you can see how he was as a father. Right? A beautiful father. If you're a husband, to see how he was as a husband. To see how he dealt with his wives beautifully. To see how he dealt with the kids beautifully. To see how he dealt with the neighbors beautifully. That is why we need to learn about him, alayhi salatu. And importantly, fourthly perhaps, is that because there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misrepresentation about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Western media. They say some terrible things about him. They draw pictures supposedly about him in a very despicable, humiliating way. And we need to learn about him so that we know what they say about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not correct. The man they talk about is not Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When you hear about him, you will be proud. You will love him. You will walk with your head raised high. This is our Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. And that is why we need to know about him alayhi salatu wasalam. And importantly also, because without following him, there will be no Jannah. He will be the first to knock on the doors of Jannah and it will be open for him alayhi salatu wasalam. And he will be there on the day of judgment, Shafi'. Shafi' means he will intercede, meaning on the day of judgment when there will be nobody to help us. يوم يفر المرء من أخيه وأمه وأبيه وصاحبته وبنيه. On the day of judgment when you will run away from your mother and father and brother and sister and your wife and husband, he will be there alayhi salatu wasalam. And we will all go to Adam and Noah and Ibrahim and Musa and Isa, and all of them will say, I can't help you on the day of Qiyamah. All of them will say, I can't help you. And then we will go to him, alayhi salatu wasalam, and we say, please, do shafa'at for us, intercede, meaning help us before Allah. And he says, Ana laha, ana laha. I am for it, I am for it, I will do you shafa'at. But only if we follow him. Alayhi salatu wassalam. So with that, let's start inshallah and keep all of these things that we mentioned in mind. Before we go on about his birth, and to appreciate the amazing transformation and the revolution that he brought, alayhi salatu wassalam, you need to appreciate quickly, I'll talk about quickly, historically, what was happening around the world before his birth, alayhi salatu wassalam, and straight after his birth. During the time of Rasulullah ﷺ's birth, there were two major empires, and possibly a third. The first major empire, or the great superpower. Today we have few superpowers. America is seen as a superpower. I don't know if Russia considers itself still as a superpower, but they call them superpowers. And they were superpowers at the time. The first superpower was the Roman or the Byzantine Empire, which was spread wide and vast, and it had already gone into what is today called the Middle East. It wasn't called the Middle East at the time. And the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire, was so powerful that by the time of the 6th, 7th century, it began to sort of weaken. But it wasn't until Islam came that it stopped its spread. And particularly during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. And the Byzantine Empire at the time was mostly Christian, but it was also decadent, meaning morally they were doing some terrible things. They were imposing high taxes on the countries that they occupied. They were an imperialist, colonialist type of empire. They wanted to occupy, enslave people, put high taxes on them. And many of the countries which were under the Roman Empire were oppressed, and they were disliking the Roman Empire. The second empire, which was very strong at the time, was the Sassanid or the Persian Empire. And it was not as equal as to the Byzantine or Roman Empire, but nevertheless it was very powerful. And predominantly they followed the religion Zoroastrianism. And again, religiously, they were also becoming immoral. They were moving away from the true teachings, and they were at loggerheads with the Roman Empire. And the Arabs were squeezed between both of them. But also you had the Indian Empire. The Indians were also emerging as a powerful empire, and then you had the Chinese. So all of this was happening internationally, and however, all of that was defined as the days of Jahiliyyah, the days of ignorance, because the true worship of Allah was absent. And there was about 600 years between Isa alayhi salam and this period. And so what Isa alayhi salam came up with, the teachings that Allah gave him, most of that teaching have gone, and only very few people remain true Christians, such as Waraq ibn Nawfal, the cousin of Khadija radiallahu anha. Now, in that situation, you have the Al Jazeera Al Arabiya, the Arabian Peninsula. It wasn't called Saudi at the time, Saudi Arabia. This is a new name, right? They called it Hijaz, or called it Al Jazeera Al Arabiya, the Hijaz, the lands of Hijaz, or the Arabian Peninsula, which included modern day Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And Yemen was doing much better actually. Yemen, because it was more fertile, Yemen was a trade route. Yemen was the center of frankincense, the incense. The Roman Empire knew Yemen, they used to deal with them. The Persian Empire used to deal with the Yemen, but not the Arabs. The Arabs were in the Arabian Peninsula, where like nobody cared about them. Nobody cared about them. And Arabia was troubled in a number of ways. Religiously, the Arabs were mushrikeen predominantly. They were pagans, right? They were mushrikeen, pagans or polytheists or pagans. And there were some remaining Jewish communities and very few Christians in Arabia. And there was no Islam, of course, because as I said, the gap between Isa alayhi salam and the time of Rasulullah was 610 years. Really? Are you okay? Closer? Oh, closer like this? Move it up. Is this better? Yes? Alhamdulillah. Sorry about that. So, and it's important to know this because you will need to appreciate the massive changes that Islam brought to the world. Now you imagine the Arabs Arabia was unknown. In fact, in the books of history, it is said the Roman emperors used to say, we would not take the Arabs slaves for our slaves. The Arabs at that time meant nothing. Economically, there was nothing. Medina was the center, Kaaba rather was the center for the Arab tribes only. There was what is there in Arabia? Aside from pocket places which were fertile for dates, there was nothing economic. They didn't have the petrol which they have today. There was no civilization as such. There was a civilization in Yemen. In fact, modern day archaeologists found covered cities in Yemen, covered underground, so much so they were high-rise buildings in Yemen at the time, which then with the passage of time they were covered under sand, and they used to call it, the historians, the archaeologists, they called those, Yemen was the New York of the day. Can you imagine? When in the Arabian Peninsula, there was nothing. Religiously, they were pagans. They used to worship idols. And they used to say, كُنَّا نَعْبُدُ الْحَجَرَ. The Arabs used to say, as in Bukhari, in Sahih al-Bukhari, it says, كُنَّا نَعْبُدُ الْحَجَرَ. فَإِذَا وَجَدْنَا حَجَرًا هُوَ أَخْيَرُ مِنْ أَحْسَنْ مِنْهُ أَلْقَيْنَاهُ وَأَخَذْنَا الْآخَرَ. فإذا لم نجد حجرا جمعنا جثوة من تراب ثم جئنا بالشاة فحرمناه عليه ثم طفنا به. The Arabs, this is in Bukhari, the Arabs said we used to worship dust. We would bring a rock and we worship the rock. And if we found a rock better than that one, we would throw the other rock and worship this other rock. And if we didn't find a good rock to worship, we collected some soil and brought the goat and milked the milk on the soil to make it, like mortar, cement, and we worship that. Can you imagine? Sometimes they used to make their gods out of dates and worship the date. The god, date. And when they got hungry, what did they do? Eat their god. They ate it, right? And of course, as you know, they had statues. And by the time Rasulullah came on the scene, they had already about 360 statues, idols, inside the Kaaba. So religiously, they were far away from Al-Hanafiyyah, from the pure religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. They had gone far away. They did not disbelieve in Allah. This is a very important point. They were not mulhid. The word mulhid in English is atheist. Atheist is somebody who says there is no Allah. Astaghfirullah. He says no, there is no God. And today's time we have more ilhad, more atheism than any other period of the history of mankind, sadly. In Australia, the 2016 census showed that one-third of all Australians say they are mulhid, they are atheists. Mulhid is somebody who completely denies there is Allah. Na'udhu billah. And if you say to them, well, how did this amazing universe, cosmos, the sun and the moon and the stars and the Milky Way and the galaxies and the billions of stars. Billions, there are more stars in the cosmos. These astronomers tell us there are more stars up there than there are sand particles on the surface of this earth. You know sand particles? I was walking on the beach the other day and you see the sand there. And you grab a handful and you say, Allah, you can't count the number of sand particles in your hand. There are more stars in the sky, in the heaven, than there are sand particles on the surface of this earth. And you say to these people who are atheists, well, how did this happen? They say, accident. Accident. You know, accident means just happens. And I want the young people to listen to this because don't be fooled by this. They don't want to believe in Allah because they don't want the responsibility. But also they don't know who Allah is. Their understanding of God, Allah, is different to you and I. That's why I said to the young people, I said to them, if somebody comes to you and says, I don't believe in God, do you? What should you respond? You say, I do believe in God, I do believe in Allah. Yeah, you could say that, but there is a better answer. You say, define God, and then I will tell you if I believe in that God or not. Because maybe his understanding of God is different to yours. And I use the word God for convenience. Because then you say, oh, God is a tree, or God is an animal. I say, no, I also don't believe in that God. I will tell you about the God I believe in. You understand? So there are a third atheists in this country. And they may influence your child. And that's why they need to come to the masjid. They need to listen to this. Those people, and excuse me for digression, but it's an important point. Those people who say there is no Allah, astaghfirullah, you ask them, how did this universe come? They say it just happened to be. Okay, we say, let's agree with you. Let's agree that this cosmos, this universe just came out of nothing. Okay? We'll say, all right, let's use the same logic. Let's use the same logic. This iPhone, this smartphone which everybody has, as is. You see how it's got this, now if it appears, it's got this clock and it's got good evening, and then you open it and got apps and calendar and directory, and you can do so much with this. If I say to you, honestly, if I say to you, this iPhone came out by itself with no interference from anybody, it just happened by accident, exactly like this, fully programmed, what would you say about me? If I was to say to you, imagine this masjid. Imagine this masjid has no windows and has no doors. Can you imagine it? It's a closed vacuum. Empty. Imagine it. This room is just 4 walls with no windows and no doors, empty, and nobody has been in it, and nobody will come in it. If we leave it like this for the next 1,000 years, I ask you, mathematically and scientifically, if we leave it empty for the next 1,000 years, what is the chance and probability that an iPhone exactly like this would come by itself from nowhere? What's the chance? Tell me. What's the chance? 0 chance. It's impossible. So you want, and the same, those atheists, they will say the same thing. They say, no, it's impossible. You say, why is it impossible? They say, because this is technologically advanced. It could not have come by itself. Somebody must have interfered, somebody must have constructed it. So you say to them, you want me to believe that this iPhone cannot emerge and create itself by itself, but you want me to believe that this magnificent universe, with its vastness and balance and equilibrium and greatness and the billions of stars and the galaxies, just happened by itself. Come on. So there was no atheism. That's interesting. The Arabs weren't atheists. They did not deny Allah. Right? But they said there is Allah, but they did not know how to worship Allah directly, and so they had statues. They said we can only reach Allah through the statues, the idols. Hence idol worship. Nowadays people say, no, we don't believe Allah, astaghfirullah. And so be careful from this. Be careful. So the Arabs were mushriks, they were pagans, and they worshipped idols. There were some Christians, and of those Christians there were only a handful who were on the pure deen. And we will look at them as we go. But predominantly the Arabs, religiously, they were completely mushrikeen, pagans. Socially, they were fragmented. The Arabs were divided into Badia and Hadar. They were the city dwellers and they were the Bedouins. And the city dwellers, they were considered, they are the more educated. The city dwellers. Can you imagine the city at the time? Imagine our city. And the people of the city at the time, in order to raise their children properly, you know what they used to do? Where did they send them? To the Bedouins. Because they said the city had too many negative influences at the time. Come and see our cities now. And socially, there was a lot of infighting. They were fragmented, the Arabs were fragmented. There was infighting. If your camel came and drank from my water, we would fight you for the next 40 years. And in that social life, there was a hierarchy. Of course, man was at the top, and there were chiefs, and women generally, except for some, like Hind. But generally, women were absolutely of no value. They could not inherit property. They were bought and sold freely. If she was divorced, she became the property of the eldest son of the husband. A man could, a woman could marry so many men and not know who the children are. This was the situation. You need to appreciate this to see the massive changes that Islam brought. And economically, I said, they didn't have much, and politically, there was a lot of infighting. And so the Arabs at the time, before Islam, you could say, were completely insignificant. So insignificant. And suddenly, within 23 years only, that was the prophethood. Only within 23 years, it becomes one of the most powerful and most recognized civilizations. And not only does it impact the Arabian Peninsula, but the entire world until today. How? Why? And we need to understand, especially the young people, often they have a sense of inferiority. They are, well, what have we Muslims done? Because they don't understand their history. There is a famous American historian who's still alive, and he's well regarded. His name is David Lewis. And if you like to read, it's a complex book, but if you are, maybe those who are 15 plus, if you like to read about your history from an non-Muslim, the book is titled this: Islam and the Making of Europe. And the beginning of the introduction, he says, there will be no Europe without Islam. A very controversial statement, but in the whole book, he shows you how the Western civilization and Europe would not be where it is today without Islam. And Islam would not have done what it has done without Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Absolutely, you need to appreciate that. You know that Muslims, which year did Muslims go to Spain? When was the first time Muslims went to Spain to conquer Spain? Which year? Take a guess. Anyone? I will tell you the year and you will never forget it, because we have a lot of shops outside that have the same year. 7-Eleven. So every time you see 7-Eleven, you remember, oh, this is the year Muslims went to Spain. And they stayed there until when? 1492. Almost 800 years. What did they do in those 800 years? You don't read this, they don't teach you this in school. We don't learn this stuff, right? All you hear is the negative stuff about Islam. Spain, when Islam was in Spain, Spain became, they called it, even the non-Muslim historians say, it became the flower, the rose of Europe. The European historians who used to come from France and England at the time and go to Spain, and they used to see the roads in Spain were paved and there were street lights, not electricity, but they were lamps. And they used to say the streets of Paris are full of mud to your knees. When in Spain they used to have so many public baths, al-hammamat, public baths, because cleanliness in Islam is very important. They used to believe in parts of Europe that to have shower more than once a month is a dangerous necessity. Can you believe it? When in Spain there were at least 70 public libraries. In each of the libraries there were about 500 volumes. At the same time, the biggest library in Europe was a library called St. Gail's Library, which had some say 30, some say 330 or 360 books. When there is a historian of mathematics by the name of Goldstein, and others, they say, and listen to this carefully, see if you understand what I'm saying, what they say. They said, had Muslims remained in Spain, man would have landed on the moon 200 years earlier. Because they were so advanced in mathematics, and so advanced in medicine, so advanced in astronomy, and so advanced in all the sciences. Right? But this is not taught. And that's why we need to understand our history. It's very important. When you understand your history, then you have a sense of izzah, a sense of positive pride, especially the young people, because you're always confronted with negativity about Islam. Negativity. No, I challenge you, go and read and find out more. And then you'll feel pride. You'll be walking in the streets with a sense of, not arrogance, but pride, because you are grounded, you know what you are talking about. And that's why, when you appreciate what was happening around Arabia before Islam, and then what happened after Islam, within 23 years, they say the Islamic civilization, some people call it Islamic empire, was the quickest to rise. It took it 23 years. And the longest to last. And it's still lasting. If you compare the Islamic civilization to the Mongols covered a bigger geographical area. The Mongols were atrocious, they were vicious, they just swept through. They say when the Mongol army decided to go and invade Iran at the time, Persia, by the time they got to Persia, they killed 1 million people. When the Mongols decided to go and destroy Iraq, Baghdad, in the year 1258, when the Mongols decided to go and destroy Baghdad in 1258, this is when they say Baghdad never recovered until the time of Saddam. And then when they destroyed it a second time after Saddam, it never recovered again. Ajib. In 1258, when the Mongols went to Baghdad, which was the capital, the political and scientific and religious capital of the Eastern Islamic civilization, the Mongols killed 800,000 Muslims. And they built a pyramid of their skulls. But although the Mongols covered a greater geographical area than the Islamic Empire, but it did not last. You see the difference? Where are they? In fact, what happened, eventually, a number of the Mongol rulers who had the Khan name, they became Muslim. So they were absorbed into the Islamic Empire, but Islam remains. Although we don't have maybe a civilization, but Islam remains. That is the difference. So it took 23 years for Islam to rise and Islamic civilization because of Rasulullah ﷺ and the great men and women who were with him. I hope it's not too much on you. Should I stop now and just give you a break? Continue next week. Hope this take a little bit longer. A little bit longer? Yes. I don't want to overburden you, right? So, and are you following? Am I going too fast, too slow? Are we okay? So far, so good. So it is in that context. Now, what we do have to say, that one thing about the Arabs, despite all of these things, they had some amazing qualities. The Arabs, the greatest thing about the Arabs at the time was their mastery of the language. And that's why the Quran came to challenge them. The historians say that the greatest thing that the Arabs had was their poetry, shi'r. They were brilliant, they were masters of the classical Arabic language. And many of them would compose long poems. on the go. Brilliant poems that continue to last until today. And it is this mastery of the language that made them prominent and distinguished. When I was doing my PhD at university, I was looking at science and Islamic civilization between the 11th and the 16th centuries. I was studying mathematics, medicine, and astronomy in Islam, in the Islamic civilization. And I wanted to go back and look at what did the Arabs have. Did they have scientists before Islam? Did they have astronomers? Did they have mathematicians? Of course they didn't. The only astronomers they had was they all knew how to read the stars. Sahih? They knew how to. In fact, now, about 25 years ago, one Malaysian brother, Singaporean brother from Melbourne, I was going out with him to visit another mosque, North Adelaide, North Brisbane, and it was at night. He says, "Come, I will show you how to find the Qibla using the stars." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." And I can do that. I can show you outside. Anywhere from Australia, if you don't have a compass, you look into the sky, and there are stars that directly exactly to the Qibla. Huh?
3 stars.
The 3 stars, exactly. My point is, they knew that. In fact, they were better than this. The Arabs at the time, not only they knew how to read the sky, but they say that Bedouins, they could know the direction by listening to the wind. They just listen to the wind. And one of the Western European converts to Islam, he was a Jew and he became Muslim. And he wrote a translation of the Quran and a number of books about Islam. His name is Mohamad Abdalla. His Muslim name, Mohamad Abdalla. And one of his books, which is really fascinating, and I advise young brothers and sisters to go and read it, it's called The Road to Mecca. The Road to Mecca. It's a story about how he became Muslim. He was a journalist, a diplomat, and he was during the time of King Faisal. And in his story, he talks about how he got lost in Ar-Rub' al-Khali, in the empty quarter. In Saudi Arabia, there is a massive piece of desert called Ar-Rub' al-Khali, the empty quarter. If you get lost there, forget it, you'll never make it out. Unless you are a Bedouin who knows the area. And Mohamad Abdalla, he said, I wanted to be the first Westerner to trespass or to go through Ar-Rub' al-Khali. But I got lost. And I kept going around in circles and circles and circles until I felt, that's it, I'm dead. And then the Bedouins found him. And they revived him. They gave him, you know how they don't give him drink straight away, but they put the water in a piece of cloth and they give him drips, because if you give him water too much, it'll kill him straight away. And then he was saying, he said, as we were traveling at night, at that time the telegraph lines were already installed. He says, at night when it's so dark, and there is no way to find out which is north and which is not, he says they listen to the wind against the telegraph lines. And they will know where to go. Amazing. And because the Arabs were brilliant in their language, masters of the language, and they had different dialects, that is why the Quran came in a language that overpasses the mastery of those Arabs. And so the greatest challenge for the Arabs at the time was the mastery of the Quran. So they didn't have a scientist, they didn't have an astronomer as such, they didn't have mathematicians. In fact, they were illiterate, most of them. But they had the language. And with the language, they could express themselves in the most brilliant and beautiful ways. And so they are poets, shu'ara, and Rasulullah wasn't. And that's why when the Quran was revealed, one of the accusations against Rasulullah, one of the accusations was sha'ir. He was a sha'ir. He was a poet. This is poetry. And Allah responded in the Quran, وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ. It is not the speech of a poet. This is revelation from Allah. And because they were brilliant in their language, when they read the Quran, not only when they became Muslim, but even those who were not Muslim, when they read the Quran, they knew in their hearts this is the words of Allah. They knew, because you had to appreciate the depth and the majesty and the brilliance of the Quran, you need to have mastery of the Arabic language. You still awake? Just checking on my brother. If you're not, let me know. A beautiful story that comes to mind. You know, when you come to give these talks, I feel very anxious when I come to give these talks. And I say, okay, what am I going to talk about? And then you start, and all these things start coming to mind. Alhamdulillah. On the story of the mastery of the language and the Quran, a man called Bilal, who was the mushrik. This is, and we will read about him later. Bilal heard about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And people say Muhammad this and Muhammad that. So he said to himself, I think this man is possessed. Because the two accusations was they accused Muhammad alayhi sallam sha'ir. Allah said, وَمَا هُوَ بِشَاعِرٍ. He's not a poet. They said he is majnoon. He's insane. Allah said he's not majnoon. They said he is possessed. Allah said he's not. So Bilal said, I wanted to go to meet this man called Muhammad and treat him. I want to cure him from, they called it al-hawa, the mess, the possession. They thought he has evil spirits, and I want to fix this guy. I'm talking about the language, so he said, I went to this man Muhammad alayhi salam, and I looked him in the face, and I said, oh Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I heard what people say about you. And I think you are possessed. And I have cured many people, so let me cure you. And this is a big insult, right? But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the man with akhlaq, the man with patience, the man with beauty and character, his sunnah was always to look at the person face to face. He never turned his face away. He looked on eyes to eyes. Let the man finish what he said. And then when he finished, he said, Intahayta, have you finished? He said, yes. How did he respond to him? He didn't even read the Quran to him. He said this to him. He said to him what you hear every Friday at the beginning of the khutbah, Inna alhamdulillah. That's what he said to him. He looked at him in the eyes and he said, Inna alhamdulillah, nahmadu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له واشهد ان لا اله الا الله واشهد ان محمدا رسول الله. These words, because of their gravity and because the one who was listening understand the Arabic language, when he heard that, he said, stop. He said, Wallahi, I have heard the poetry of the poets and the magic of magicians and the sorcery of the sorcerers. But I have never heard words like this. أعطني يدك لأبايعك على الإسلام. Give me your hand, O Muhammad, so I can become Muslim now. You see the point I'm trying to make? The power of the language. And the Arabs say some speech is magic. You can mesmerize people with your language. You can bewitch them. And if you have a mastery of the Arabic language, and that's why we encourage every Muslim to learn Arabic, because to understand Kalamullah. And so, although Rasulullah did not go to a school, did not study with anybody, when the Quran was revealed to him, and now when he was reading to those Arabs who were masters of the language, they could not respond to it. And then Allah challenged them, bring one ayah like it, bring 10 verses like it, bring one surah like it. And they could not. And they still cannot. Why? Because Kalamullah. This is the speech of Allah Ta'ala. So the Arabs had the language. And secondly, they had al-dhaka wal-fitna. Despite all the challenges they had, they were very smart and very alert people. And that's why when they became Muslim, that's it. And they had karam and sakha. They were very generous, in fact, to the extent of extravagance. Too much. And still, alhamdulillah, one thing about the Arabs until today is they're very generous. And by the way, this generosity, this karam, you find it in every Muslim culture whether in Bosnia or Turkey or Pakistan or India, because of Islam. Because of Islam. Islam introduces karam and sakha, generosity, right? And the Arabs were well known for that. But also the Arabs were well known for something else, al-shaja'a, wal-muru'a, wal-najda. They were known for their bravery and their chivalry. Yes, they were worshipping idols, but they were men. And if they gave a word, they meant it. And if they, that's why, although they disbelieved, they used to come to Rasulullah. They used to face him and say, we don't believe in what you say. And the only people who used to hide that became known as munafiqin, hypocrites. But the Arabs were brave. And the other important thing about the Arabs that made them eventually conquer the world under the banner of Islam is their love for Hurriya. They were free people. The desert people were free people. They loved freedom. They didn't want any of the Romans or the Persians to come and rule them. And that's why they were ready to sacrifice everything to be free and to spread that freedom. And that's exactly what they have done. And under the great banner of Islam, and they had wafa, they had loyalty. When they became Muslim, their loyalty, and even before that, they were very loyal and they were physically strong. And all of these qualities were absolutely necessary to be able to receive the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and to take it on their shoulders, men and women, and to run with it. And with a handful, only a handful of them, when Islam penetrated their hearts, they were ready and able to challenge the superpowers of the day. Rome, Persia. They had no fear in their hearts except the fear of Allah Ta'ala. One man, they used to send one man to the ruler of the Roman Empire, one Sahabi, who wasn't dressed properly and was riding maybe a donkey, even not a horse. One man to go to say to the emperor in his court when he was asked, why did you come here? What do you want? The Arab who's coming from the desert, who was a nobody, to challenge now the superpower of the day. He is in the court of the emperor, and the emperor says to him, what do you want? Why did you come? And he gives the most beautiful, the most brilliant answer. He says, نحن قوم ابتعثنا الله. ما قد ابتعثنا الرسول. ابتعثنا الله لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد، أي أنت من عبادة أمثالك إلى عبادة رب العباد. ومن جور الأديان، أي ظلم الأديان، إلى عدل الإسلام. ومن ضيق الدنيا إلى سعة الآخرة. He says, we have come, Allah sent us to take people out of the worship of other people, meaning to take the people out of worshiping people like you, so they can worship Allah, and to take people away from the injustices of other systems to the justice of Islam, and to take people out of the tightness of this dunya. And he's speaking to this ruler who was sitting on a throne with a big golden crown on his head, surrounded by wealth. He says to him, we have come to take people out of the tightness of this dunya that you have to the vastness of the earth. This is the message of a man. So can you then imagine how brilliant those people were? They were the students of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, men and women, students of none other than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And inshallah ta'ala next week we'll begin talking about his birth alayhi sallam, and therefore and what comes after that. Jazakumullah khair, barakallah fikum. We shall stop so you can go and make wudu and you can absorb what has been said. And inshallah ta'ala we'll see you again next, well, every day for masjid, for the Seera next Jum'ah inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد. بارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم. أيوة.